My name's Sam Ebrahim. I'm the Executive General Manager in New South Wales for Truku, a national recruitment business. Welcome to Diary of a CIO. Purpose of this podcast is over the 20 years I've spent in the technology sector, I've seen an abundance of content available around technology transformations, technology stacks, agile, etc. What I noticed was a real gap in the market for the story behind the title. So the purpose of this podcast is to interview CIOs from across Australia, understand their journey, their purpose, with the intention of inspiring the next generation of leaders in Australia. With that in mind, I'd like to introduce my guest today, which is Stevie-Ann Divoco from Beyond Bank. I met Stevie probably around 6 months ago with the intent of talking around being on this podcast. And then we also crossed paths at a Women in Leadership event that I ran at the end of last year in Sydney as well. So I'd like to welcome you to the show, Stevie, an opportunity for you to intro yourself to the viewers.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for having me. So I'm Stevie-Ann Divoco. I'm the CIO of Beyond Bank. We're a customer-owned mutual bank that operates across Australia, about 400,000 customers. And yeah, bit of background on my career, probably really not typical CIO career, maybe a zigzag career, if you may. I mean, I spent a lifetime in banking, but doing everything from risk management to strategy and innovation to transformation to product and development, and then to tech. I've spent quite a bit of time in tech, working predominantly on the retail product space when I was at Westpac, and then moved to NAB, ran their digital platform across retail, business and corporate and institutional, and now a whole new experience as a CIO, running literally everything that kind of smells or sounds like tech or data, everything from like, oh, my screen doesn't work, to, what is the nascent emerging technology strategy for the bank.
And I think this podcast is this series of the podcast is to dispel the myth of the typical CIO background. I think most people on this show do not have a typical background. Just goes to show that you can get to becoming a CIO without having a typical background. And the topics we want to cover today, we're going to be talking around culture, emerging leadership, educating the board, building a strong mindset, and also I think your own personal style of kind of operating at a high intensity level and how to maintain that, or how to, I suppose, implement that into the workday. So with that in mind, if you could just share a bit more information around, I suppose, your background. You talked around your not typical route into becoming a CIO. Just a bit more information around how you navigated that initially to where we are today.
Yeah. So I started my career in consulting, actually, at KPMG, and then I moved to EY. And that was really because, I had no idea what I wanted to do coming out of uni. I just, I knew I was good at solving problems. I liked different work. Like, I just didn't have that mind where I could fixate on one thing. Like, I wasn't going to go down like an accounting path or a legal path. I love the variety, and I loved the variety of consulting. But then GFC hit, and it was a little bit like, in consulting, you really need to chase the work, and there was no fun work or advisory work. And advisory practice was so slim back then. Like, I mean, there would have been 10 grads in the advisory practice and like 150 in the accounting practice. But GFC hit, and I was, the only work that existed was compliance. So that was interesting. Like, I mean, my whole career has been about learning experiences. So that was a really new and different learning experience. And I got to travel the whole country, and, it was my first like traveling experience. And it was really good to lead a program. And then, when Westpac insourced that program, they asked me to join. So that was kind of, I just kind of stumbled into in-house banking. I thought, this is a good idea. And, it sounded interesting because I got to lead a team, and that would be my first formal leadership role. And for that, I learned a lot about leadership. And yeah, from there, I guess, it helped me really understand like the network and how the bank worked. So, I ended up going from many different roles from, moved into product because I just happened to have a really good relationship as, like, feel like part of my strength is building the relationship. So even as a compliance manager, it was like really about, well, let's forge that relationship with the business so we can, do things that are great and we have such joint objectives. And I think that's how I kind of managed to go to a completely different role in like product management. And the same thing, then I kind of did that for a bit. And, it was really exciting time because Westpac was starting their kind of innovation journey and with the Reinventure Fund and like moving into startups. And, I always really craved that, like emerging tech and the new things. So, I just kind of, there was a person that was running the team and they were new, and I kind of was like, hey, you know what, like you've got all these great ideas and a good strategy, and like I know how to navigate the org, and together we could be really good because like I'm a really good executor and you've got the strategy, and like one thing led to another, and I was working in strategy and innovation and then transformation, and went off and had my daughter and came back, and just again just chatting to people, talking about, oh, I don't know what's next for me. And then I got into tech, and that was really great, like being able to hone kind of the stuff I knew about the org and the business side and bring that into technology. And I think like I was a little bit like nervous going into tech because I was like, oh, wow, like really?
So your first interaction moving into client side, that was into finance, right, and compliance.
Yeah.
How did you make the journey then? Because I think going from advisory, compliance, finance, and then client side into compliance and finance, and then the journey into tech. So how did that come about? What's the story behind that?
Well, like moving from kind of compliance to product to strategy to innovation, I think again, it's a lot about you building a network, and not in that like intentionally going to seek out building a network. Like that's not me. I'm an extrovert. I like people, and I'm a really strong believer that you can't do things on your own. Like you need multiple parts to make something successful. And so, like all these different roles help me meet a lot of people and connect the org. And in a big org like a Westpac or a NAB or any big org, there's thousands of people. And honestly, sometimes you wouldn't even know like many of them. And so having all this variety of roles really helped me work out how, like who's who, how can I work with many different people to connect. And that really helped me in my tech role because, again, that's like it's an execution thing. It's about bringing people together. So, yeah.
And you talked about kind of networking there. I think a lot of people find networking quite daunting, and it's something that doesn't come naturally to people. I think you've got a different approach where you don't intentionally kind of seek out networks. So how do you, what was the approach you went out to identify who do I want to network with and how am I going to approach them, or what is the unintentional way of networking in your view?
I think like if you view yourself and like everyone in an org or society or whatever as people with skills and experiences, for me networking is about connecting experiences and like common goals. So working in a big org like Westpac, in a role like technology or in project delivery or in transformation, you don't do things yourself. Like you need multiple different people. So it was kind of like, okay, if I need to do X, like what are the skill sets that I need to do? Okay, I'm going to need to go out and find people with these skill sets and like you meet one person, you kind of chat to them, like they'll connect you to someone else, and this kind of ring of connection kind of grows. And I'm a like massive believer. Like I like to connect people too. Like if I see a problem that needs to get solved and I know like, oh, this person in my network and that person in my network, like I go out and like overtly, I'm like, you two should connect and you both want to do this thing. Or if you two came to, or you three or you group of people came together, you could do this thing. And it's that network effect that's like really can be transformational.
Value added networking. So identifying the people in your professional work that would connect well and then connecting them to other people. What about, I suppose, you're seeking out people outside of your immediate professional network? How do you identify people outside your immediate network you think would be able to add value to what you're doing, what other people might do?
Well, I mean, you go to like those events, like the event that you put on last year, that was really good. Like, you just like they're really good things, like to go and you kind of read someone's tag and you're like, oh, you're from X. Oh, I had this question about this, like, and like those sort of things are really good. I think people tend to shy away from networking events because they think they have this stigma of like, oh, it's just people trying to get ahead and whatever. And I mean, like, I'm not thinking like that. I'm kind of like excited to meet new people. I mean, maybe that's just because I'm an extrovert and like that comes a little bit more naturally to me. Like, could talk to a tree, but there's that. There's LinkedIn as well. Like, I really like to, I do a lot of infrared sauna, scour LinkedIn while I'm on there. Probably shouldn't bring my phone in, but I do. And, I like to read about this person's doing that and that person's doing that. That gives you ideas too. Or like, when you're recruiting, like you see people just putting posts about what they do and you're like, oh, that person looks like a person that like I'd like to work with, or might know someone that is like that or has this skill. It's those sort of things. So it's kind of a combination of like digital and physical kind of networking, that.
Do you prefer digital or physical networking in terms of where do you see you've got the biggest value out in your career?
I think it's different situations will need different mediums. Like, and also in a kind of geographically disconnected world, your reach is probably greater with digital, but I'm a face-to-face human. I'd like to go, oh, hey, like, oh, there's this opportunity. Do you want to meet for a coffee and we can chat, or if you're like, oh, let's have a call or whatever. Not a kind of keyboard.
I think like for me the breadth of networking opportunities digitally is greater, but the depth of the networks you get digitally is less so. So I think the face-to-face time and the interactions you have with people can't be replicated digitally, in my opinion. I think what you get and gather from someone in a conversation face-to-face is a lot deeper. But I think, the benefit of those, particularly in recruitment, we spend a lot of our time, I suppose, headhunting, networking and researching. But then once we identify a network opportunity or someone we would like to meet, face-to-face time is incredibly important as well.
I think also you get a bit of a feel about the person's vibe and
100%,
stuff as well in person.
Coming into your role as well, I think one of the big things that a lot of CIOs, particularly new CIOs, wouldn't necessarily struggle with, but something, a skill they need to learn quite quickly, is educating the board. Which is not something that comes naturally to people, and it's not something that's, I suppose, easy to understand from the immediate get-go. So what's your view in terms of how you would interact with the board to educate them, particularly around technology matters that maybe a lot of boards aren't, I suppose, technology savvy as you might be?
God, it's very hard. I mean, like, it's probably one of the hardest things that you do at this level. I mean, you've got to really understand. I always try to approach everything in this way. Is like, get into the mindset of the other person. Like, what do they need to do? What's their role? What do they need to achieve? The boards are there for, to ensure strong governance. They're there to help, formulate that strategy and help drive the business to ensure, sustainability and solvency and all of those kinds of things. So with that, it's actually, this is why I'm such a big, strong believer in the fundamentals of IT, like especially with, when you're talking to the board or whatever. But like, it's not the most exciting part of IT, but, I always say, we work for a bank and there's two things that customers expect, when they give you their money. It's keep it safe and give it to me when I want. Really simple. Like, everything else is bells and whistles, but the basics are those two. And that's like in tech, security and availability. So, like I always start there. And that's been my approach with the board. And that also resonates from a risk management perspective. I think it's your framing is always very important. It's really hard with tech because you're a cost center most of the time. I mean, now it's like a lot that there's a stronger recognition on like the enabling factor of that revenue generation is largely through technology. But, really focusing in on, okay, like the basics are we need to get really strong cybersecurity. A lot of the time, the tricky thing is explaining in a way that kind of like nods to the past and like talks about, okay, great, like you've done some really, really good things, but like you've brought me in as a new person, and like I'm here to tell you, what good looks like from my experience. And here's where we are and there's where we need to be. And that's a really tricky conversation because no one likes it. It's a really bitter pill to swallow because everyone wants to believe that they're like doing great.
Yeah.
And so, like it's really important to, focus on, okay, we've done this. Here's where we are. These are the things we need to do. But, you have a pathway. You have an answer to this problem. Here's how we will fix it. There's a timeline. These are the resources we need to dedicate to it and whatever. Frame the problem appropriately. Like I think, it's really easy to sound alarmist, especially when you're talking about tricky things like cybersecurity or operational resilience, because they are so fundamental to the bank. And then I think sometimes you can get really carried away and just focus there. And you need to remember as, a CIO, there is a risk element and the board's very interested in, managing risk, but also there's that strategy and balancing, how to be competitive and how to grow and be successful and profitable, whatever. And that's, that innovation side. So fix the fundamentals and then look at, what's happening outside of your industry or outside of your bank or whatever. And then appropriately scaling it, because it's really easy to come off like, for me, I've been in big banks for so long. Coming to a small bank, it's, you have to do that mental adjustment on scale and what's important, here versus there. And, it's easy to come off as like, oh, that's too big a solution for us and we don't need these things, but, just framing things appropriately.
Do you find it was it a challenge for you to adapt your style from the Westpacs and the NABs, the real big end of town, to Beyond Bank, which is a fairly small bank compared to those guys? Was it a difficult challenge for you to adapt how you approach the board and how you, I suppose, got them to understand your point of view?
I think when you're in a Westpac or a NAB or whatever, it doesn't matter like how, like you can be super, like I was an exec at NAB, and you don't get time with the board. Like there's very, very few people that would get time with a NAB or a Westpac board. Now I'm kind of every month, at least once or twice, almost all day with the board. It's a different.
Would you recommend that people take a point in their career where they join a smaller business where you have much easier access to the board? Have you found that valuable in terms of your personal development and growth?
Personally, I've found it exceptional. Like it's the exact experience I wanted, like, because I've got that kind of mindset where I have to know where something works. And having worked like for 20 years almost in banking, in big banks, and I can't tell you how much more I've learned in the last year about how a bank works, like the things you do to make a bank, like how a bank makes money and the treasury function and like all of these things that you don't get exposure to because it's so big in a big bank that you're doing this little like slither of a thing. And it's really important and you're very senior and you're doing big teams and blah, whatever, but you're not seeing end to end. And I love seeing end to end. And I like the breadth of that. And I like being able to face into the board and see how a board runs and governs, an important institution.
Yeah. Throughout my career, I've intentionally worked for small to medium-sized businesses. They've all been privately owned, but having that interaction with the founders of the business and the actual leadership, I think I'd struggle going into a ASX-listed top end of town where you're kind of a number on a board. I love that kind of small environment. You have the exposure and the breadth and the experience as well. That really kind of drives and motivates me. So I definitely understand the value of that. Mm-hmm. What tips and tricks would you give to any listeners who are just stepping into their first role where they're going to have access to the board and the expectation from the board? What tips or tricks would you give people to start out that journey to make sure they're successful?
Oh, don't underestimate the amount of reading you have to do. Like there's a lot of, once you get to like you're reading a lot of papers, a lot of data, a lot of things that they're not in your like sphere. Like I don't read a lot of tech things in my role, but I read a lot of papers and I read a lot about how the bank works. And like you've got to kind of broaden your context. I think and all of that is important because you need to be prepared. There's a level of preparation that, you can't get away with, like, just kind of flying by. Like, I feel like in the big banks, people were like, oh, assumed the papers were not read. Like here, the papers are assumed read, and you need to be ready for questions on those papers. And I think the good thing about having really no resources. Like, I came into this role and I was like, where are the army of people that transform the thing I want to write into a board paper? And everyone just looked at me and they're like, no, that's you. You're the army. And I was like, oh, okay. But like, I mean, it's great because that actually, like, you need to really, really know. There's no hiding in a small. You need to know your stuff, and you need to, like, be able to answer all the questions on the things that you're talking about. And I think uniquely, if you go into a role like in a smaller organization where you own end to end, like, you truly get to write your strategy on how you meet the business strategy and the key strategic objectives. Whereas a lot of the times in the big companies, you get handed a strategy, and a lot of what you're doing is like the execution or the strategy to execute. But this is the whole lot. So
interesting what you said about not being a technologist. I think we spoke about before about not necessarily being a technology SME doesn't always translate into being a good leader. What's your take on that? I mean, I know some exceptional technology SMEs that have transferred into being good leaders, but also I know a lot of technology SMEs that didn't want to become leaders or struggled to transition into a leadership role because they love tech so much. And you've got to, what's your view on that? Do you think good, strong technology SMEs can become good leaders? And have you seen people go through that journey? And I suppose, what's the secret? If someone's listening to this and they love the technology function they work in, but they want to become a CIO, what advice would you give them in terms of taking that journey from being a technology SME to becoming a good leader?
Yeah, I think anyone can be a good leader if you want to be a leader. So like, that's the really important point. I've seen a lot of instances where people believe in order to get higher in position or succeed in their career or get paid more money or whatever, that they must take a leadership role, even though that's not where their passion is, or, they're just, and they're not going to be good at it. Like, if you're not passionate about something, it's very rare that you're going to be good at it. And so, this is why there's in tech, and I saw it done actually really well at NAB, and they kind of separated the two and said there are people leaders who are technologists. You're a strong engineer, and you lead people. But there's a very distinct career path that can be very successful for people who are not interested in people leading, that want to be technical specialists but also rise and be senior. And they kind of put in this kind of distinguished engineer role, and that was about, like, using your engineering experience and your sphere of influence to uplift the skill set in the org around engineering capability, but not necessarily having to be a people leader. I think as a CIO, you lead people. Like, it's a role where you need to be good at leading people because you inevitably will lead leaders. And there's a difference between leading an individual and leading a leader, and you need to know how to teach your people how to lead individuals as well. So there's like levels of leadership. And, so I feel like if you don't, there's other career paths. If you don't want to be a lead, like a people leader, but a CIO, role is a lot about the people.
I love coaching and I love mentoring. It's very time consuming, but incredibly rewarding. But I've seen people in my career that have been put into leadership roles that didn't necessarily want to be there, and the results never good. So I think the intention and the purpose and what motivates you in the morning has to be aligned to people leadership and getting the best out of people and seeing people grow and develop underneath you as well. What advice, you talked around the different kind of layers of leadership. If someone's just becoming a leader for the first time and I suppose maybe struggling to understand the approach that they should take, what's your secret to good leadership? How have you managed to build relationships with the people underneath you and I suppose uplift their capability and help them grow with your guidance?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm a people person, so
Mm.
for me, it comes naturally. I also love coaching, and the thing that I love to see is people develop. So, like, taking a baseline on someone's capability, be it technical or people or whatever, and seeing them grow through the journey. I like to coach and mentor and give advice, and so I think if you're coming into sort of your first leadership role. I think people get really like, oh, now I've got to be the leader. Like, have a think about what that means. Like you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. Like, I feel like people think, oh no, now I'm the leader, I have to be the smartest. Like, in fact, actually, no, my team are way smarter than me and I specifically picked them like to be super smart in each of their disciplines because I need like rock star like security people and rock star architects and engineers that are so engineering technical, to build the future of our state. And my job is not to be like more technically competent than any one of those, but to bring it together. And so I
Yeah.
think if you're starting in as a new leader, like you've got to really think about what's your role in all of this. It's not to be, you can't be everything to everyone. You have a purpose, and your purpose is to teach people how to lead
Yeah.
and to bring like to harness the great capability and empower the great capability underneath you to be like collectively great.
Yeah. That's interesting. And going back to what you did, I suppose, at the beginning of the podcast, when we talked around, I suppose, your initial journey into technology, does seem that you enjoy coming outside of your comfort zone and you seek out uncomfortable opportunities. I think in order to do that, you have to have a level of confidence, which I think is important. How do you build confidence? Like, how do you have the belief in yourself that, yeah, that's a challenging, uncomfortable situation, but I'm going to go after that, and I believe I can be successful doing that?
I have like a fundamental belief, or maybe till I hit motherhood, I
Mm.
had a fundamental belief that if you study hard enough, or if you like I'm really good at picking up new skills. So if I like read a book or I watch a YouTube or I learn something, like if you practice enough, you can do this thing. I mean, until I became a mum and then I realized there's no book, and like I sucked repeatedly at this, but in a work context like that. So that underlying belief drove me to feel confident to put myself out there. I think a lot has to do with how you're brought up as well. Like my parents are just, they from day one, they were like, we really, you go and do, you've got an interest, you go and do that, like they helped build that really healthy, um, self-confidence in me. And then I also like there's a part of me that just doesn't care what people think. Like sometimes people get hung up on the, oh no, like if I've not done that, what if someone says this, or oh, I better not post that on LinkedIn because someone might say, oh, you're bragging, or like I don't know, whatever. I just think you're missing out if you're not going after an opportunity. And like, what's the worst someone can say? Like, no,
Mm.
okay, cool. Like, I'll just do something else.
I think for me as well, being real and authentic, I think putting yourself out there, being real and being authentic is important. I think also as well, we're not particularly in my field and probably not in the banking field, we're not saving lives.
No,
So what's the worst that can happen?
yeah.
So I think having that confidence to kind of push yourself and believe that you can succeed in things, but also understanding if you don't succeed, it's not the end of the world, and just kind of pick yourself up and keep moving forward. Has there been any points in your career where you've seeked something out of your comfort zone and it hasn't worked out? And what were the learnings that you took away from that you use for the future?
Yeah, I mean, the example I gave was, I mean, it's not that I sought it out, but when I like a lot of women will relate to this. When I became a mum, like again, I had that mentality, like I am going, like I'm going to be good at this because I'm good at stuff, and like not in a braggy way, but like I'm good at being good at stuff. Like I can learn things, and then like that just hit me like, wow, like this, there is no instruction manual. Like this is really hard. Like I struggled so much, and I'm like, this is supposed to be natural for me and whatever, like, and it really wasn't. And I was like, this kid's supposed to sleep, and my kid did not sleep for years. And like I went back to work after 6 months, and I was like 3/4 zombie for at least a year. And I found that a struggle, like learning, you expecting yourself to operate at that level that you were before with no sleep, and just introducing a whole new thing into your life. Like that juggle was super super hard for me. So that was probably really the trickiest thing. And then there's been points in my career where I've thought, oh yeah, no, I really want to go for this sort of role, and I've like tried to go down that path, and like luckily I didn't get that role, or it didn't work out for me. And I feel like that's just pushed me to a different path. And I'm really happy with the work I'm doing now and the things I'm learning. And yeah, sometimes it's for the best. Like I think people need to understand that even if you go for something and you don't get it, there's always something else.
And you talked around, I suppose, returning to work after kind of motherhood. How was that for you? And what advice would you give to the listeners going through the same situation? Did you have to, I suppose, pull back on your seeking out discomfort because you had priorities outside of work? Did you have to temper, I suppose, your ambitions whilst you kind of adapted to the return to work? What was it like for you, and what advice would you give to people listening?
No, so it was very hard. It was a hard transition because I was, in my mind, I'm like, I should be here, and like your body's sort of failing you, unfortunately. But that didn't stop me because I'm like, I know this is temporary. It's not always going to be this hard. I'm going to sleep at some point. I'm very lucky because I have a very strong family around me. My husband is excellent. He's super hands-on. That situation where I've like my kind of community or whatever helping really, really helps. And that's the advice I've always given to people when they've said to me, oh, how do you do it all? I'm like, I don't do it all. And you shouldn't expect to do it all. You can't do it all yourself. Outsource. Like, we have a cleaner. I don't clean my house. Like we have my mum and dad to drop off and pick up a lot of the time. And, we balance between my husband. Like I travel a lot for work. So, we rely on like our family, and, that's like, I think that kind of expectation, like a lot of women get this expectation of like, oh, I've got to do everything. You don't have to do everything.
Yeah. And do you feel, I think you're being high energy, like great confidence, seeking out comfort zones, a period of time potentially like that, or other periods of your life where you're struggling to be at your optimal? How do you feel about being vulnerable? So I think I speak to a lot of CIOs where the perception is that you're a leader. You should be strong. You're the rock. You hold the IT function together. And that gives that, I suppose, that precedent that I can't feel vulnerable when I need to be. Do you struggle feeling like being open and being vulnerable when you're not at your A game or not operating at 100%?
No, I think so. So sometimes you have to, right? Like if you're going through a massive restructure or something, like sometimes you've just got to hold the fort, right? Yeah. I'm a big believer in like peaks and troughs. So like I like to work super, super hard, but like in July, August, in those school holidays, I take time off. That's my like switch off time. That's my delegate everything time. And like really need a break because, your career is not a sprint. It is a marathon. I know a lot of people have said that, but it's true. Like you can't operate at this level constantly without a break. You must break. And like I have the same approach with my training. I like to go, really, really hard and then have a break. Really, really hard, have a break. And I feel like that works for me. Like I don't have a problem with being vulnerable. I think that you need to build, like when you hire your people, always hire people that, I can trust.
Yeah.
And, and it's a two-way thing. Like, my team can be vulnerable with me and they're like, today I just don't have it, and that's important. And I think it's like you as a leader set that tone. So like being able to say, I just can't, like today I'm, here's how I'm feeling. This is the reason why I'm whatever. Like it gives your team permission to feel that way too. And I think it's important to be able to support each other that way.
I agree. I think my leadership as well is very similar to yours. I think I want my team to understand that they can come to me with their problems. And if you're not feeling 100%, that's absolutely fine. Yeah. And I'd much rather people in my team come to me and take a little bit of time out to reset than just pushing through and pretend the issue isn't there. Because I think for me, what comes out the other end is a much happier worker, a healthier worker, and also the outcomes for the business are a lot better as well. So very much that. How do you build a strong mindset? What's your approach to building resilience and building a strong mindset? Is it just natural? Is there something you consciously look at or maybe you work on as kind of your career's developed?
Um, I think it so I think it comes from seeking out those experiences or opportunities that make me feel uncomfortable. I think the more you throw yourself in the deep end,
Mm.
the the more resilient you become. Like doing hard things makes you able to withstand harder things. So yeah, that's
And is there any tips or tricks people who maybe don't have that level of stronger mindset? What do you early in your career? So you're coming from consulting and into an environment which was very unfamiliar to you. How did you initially build that strong mindset?
like you probably don't have it in. I mean, it's natural that you don't have it in the beginning, but I'm really like stubborn about like what I want to do and where like and so i- in my mind I'm like, even if this is really painful, you've just got to do it. Or you know what's the worst that can happen? Like if you I think it's those sort of things. Also, like just having a conversation with people that have gone through that. That's why the network again is really important, because you're able to say, okay, like I'm thinking about this, or I'm grappling with that, or I really want to go and do this. And like, or I'm in this project and it's not going well. Like, have you been in that situation before? Like reaching out to people and getting advice always helps you kind of get through it, because you don't feel like, okay, I'm the only person going through this, or oh, here's a tactic someone else used, maybe if I use that, like there's a way out of this, or there's light at the end of the tunnel. Yeah.
Yeah. And you talked around earlier, just a minute ago, around how you operate in kind of short, sharp bursts. Is that just your natural style and your natural energy? Is that something you think fits your role better? What's the reason for that kind of a short burst approach?
Oh, I feel like I've always been that kind of like, I'm really high energy, but you can't. It's not a sustained high energy. Like, and I'm also very in tune with how I feel. Like, it's in all of my world. Like, even in my training or whatever. Like, if I wake up and I'm like, I need a rest day, like I will have a rest day. It's not like people say, oh, like, like, how many days do you train? Like, what day do you take up? I'm like, it's not that calculated. It is like really about how I feel when I wake up in the morning. And it's the same thing like in my career and all, like building in those blocks of downtime really does help you kind of rejuvenate, and it helps you operate at a better level. Like, we've all been that graduate that just worked. I mean, back in the day when I was a grad, like, whoa, you worked a lot, like all the time, like ridiculously long hours, weekends, and doing that for years and years, like it's just it burnt, like you can't, you're not operating effectively. And like as soon as I learned to like be in tune with my body and my energy levels and how I felt, and like really harness those to the best. And like even the way I organize like my work, like I know I'm like a morning person, so like after I get back from the gym, I know where I can put my focus time. I know where I should put my meetings, and like work with my assistant to like make sure my diary is optimized. Like all of those things are really, really important. That's how you sustain peak performance. But building in those breaks are critical.
And people who see you in your high performance, and I think in my experience, when you see high performers, they attract workload, because people just look at, wow, Steve is she's a high performer, she's high energy, and then they don't always see kind of how you operate in terms of the I suppose the flow. How do you manage the expectations of the business if they think you're a high performer? You start attracting work, like you get the attention of senior people in the business, and like, we want Stevie on this, like she's exceptional. How do you push back and say, well, this is a bit too much? Or how do you manage the workload to make sure that I suppose that up and down high performance that works for you doesn't become a constant line at the top?
Like I think my problem is I don't like to say no to opportunities, especially if I find it exciting. Like there's something in my brain that goes, oh, like I know this, we're doing so much here, but like I really like that's really, oh, that'll be exciting. So usually it's just like setting expectations. Like we'll take that on, but I need X more people to do it. It's
Yeah.
like you don't take it on yourself. You kind of say, okay, like here's the expectation. If I've got like 100 people doing these 5 things, like, and you want me to add a 6th thing, then I need 10 more people to do that
Hmm.
well, and it will be done this fast, I think, and for this much, it's that
Yeah.
kind of setting of expectation. Like I don't say no to opportunities because I like doing work. Like I like taking on. I get bored really quickly. So, but like I can if I didn't want the work. But it's being really clear on like here's what it's going to take to do that thing.
Yeah, and managing expectations, setting boundaries, very important in your role. What's your kind of wind down activities? You talked a lot about training, kind of your family, your kind of child and your husband are really, really important to you. What's your outside of work activities, and how do you set boundaries to make sure that the business doesn't encroach on what's really important to you?
So like in terms of, so the gym for me is like really, it's not a downtime thing, but it's a focus thing. Like I really I'm into strength training. I feel like it's a weird discipline because I'm not used, like I'm a like high energy kind of person, and like when you're doing really heavy strength training, you have to like consciously build in that 2-minute break between very heavy sets, and you're not doing 10, you're doing 3 to 5, and it's like when I started that, it was a real struggle, but it's really like that varying of training like really helps me kind of just focus my mind on something that's not work or family or whatever, all the other things. And then I do a lot of like infrared sauna. Like that's again another thing. I found that really hard in the beginning just because you have to just sit, and like you're just in a box, just sitting and sweating. But like it really focuses the mind.
Yeah.
And I mean that's again really important to do. And I'm very strict about my sleep. Like I'm like almost baby, like 9 p.m. I'm in bed, because I wake up at like 4:30, so I can be ready to go to the gym. So like I like to have. I used to think you don't need sleep, like you could just keep going, but I find my performance is completely transformed when I have like solid amount of sleep. So
I think sleep's very much, I wouldn't say underrated, but it's something that suffers a lot when I think social, family, work. That's probably one of the most critical things that you need in terms of to perform to your optimum as well.
Yeah, it's like literally when your body heals.
Yep.
So, for me, like that's like the last year has been really focused on like you got to get, even if you have to go to bed early, you just got to get your sleep in.
Thank you for listening today. And Stevie's been an amazing guest. Today we covered a wide array of topics. The non-typical, but is sometimes becoming the typical non-route into becoming a CIO was discussed today. We also talked around building a mental strength, educating the board, Stevie's own personal style of high intensity work, and also the tips to work-life balance and building good boundaries. So as always, to close out the podcast, I'd like to offer Stevie the chance to give earlier in her career, Stevie, some advice that you wish you had. So what would that be?
Yeah, I think it's go out and seek advice from people. Like, don't be afraid to, ask people for help or advice. I think the earlier Stevie would have been like, oh, they don't have time, or they're so busy, or, people want to help other people. So, like if you want to reach out to someone and get their advice or like get their mentorship or whatever, like go and do that. Like again, the worst they can say is no, that's fine. You'll find someone else.
Amazing. Thank you. As always, please like, comment and share, and stay tuned for more podcasts in the future. Thank you.